Good morning, Dr. Harrison.
Hello, Miss Dean. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. And I'm excited about what we're about to do this morning with our great panelists and our moderator. And my name is Mary Dean, and I'm president,
Hello,
president
Miss
of
Dean. How you doing today?
president of Black Women Empowered in Wichita Inc. And I'm just thrilled to do this from darkness to light number two. And with our panelists, I think everybody's going to be really excited about the conversation and the discussions that's going on. So uh, I'm going to step back and let Dr. Harrison say a few words. Thank
Okay,
you
well, I just
again.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm excited as well, and I just wanted to piggyback off of what Miss Dean said. We're really excited to be in collaboration with Black Women in Power. And I speak on behalf of Dr. Marche Fleming Randall, the Vice President of the Office of Military Veterans and First Responders at Wichita State University. And we're excited about our new partnership with Black Women Empowered. We definitely support the organization and the organization's critical mission to expand awareness around mental health and wellness, especially as it pertains to women of color, all people, but especially women of color. And we just look forward to a really bright future with this collaboration as we continue to grow and expand and make an impact in the community. So welcome, and we have a great moderator and great panelists. So you're in for a treat today. So thanks again on behalf of Wichita State University and the Office of Military Veterans and First Responders, and of course, Dr. Marche Fleming Randall, who is attending today as well. So thank you. Talk to you soon.
Good morning. It is so awesome to see all of you here this morning. Totally appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. I want to introduce to you very quickly our panelist for today. And we are going to speak about is Tasha Parker. Tasha Parker is a therapist and a consultant out of Wichita, Kansas. She has over 12 years of experience working in the field of human services in a variety of different settings, such as the jail, community mental health centers, group homes, nonprofit organizations, work settings, and child advocacy centers. She is a licensed specialist clinical social worker, a clinical hypnotherapist, and holds a master's in public administration. Tasha works out of her private practice, and she is a therapist and a consultation. She does therapy and consultation services. And so that is Tasha Parker. Yay. So the thing about it is we can't really clap because that makes it really weird. So we just kind of, in Toastmasters, we go, woo! Kind of make everybody feel all warm and fuzzy as we move forward. So let's talk about Tyler Miller. I know Tasha. I have not met Tyler, but I think that this is going to be a fab time. Tyler is a pharmacist, which there are not a lot of brown pharmacists in Wichita, America. So she is a pharmacist, a clinical and consultant pharmacist who is currently a market health and wellness director for Walmart Pharmacy and Vision Care Centers in Southern Arizona. A native of Wichita, Dr. Miller earned her doctorate of pharmacy degree from Xavier University, HBCU in the house, with a pharmacy career that spans 16 years. She has worked for Walgreens and Walmart in various capacities, including as a staff pharmacist, compounding pharmacist, pharmacy manager, and pharmacy clinical services manager across Kansas, Alabama, and Georgia. Dr. Miller is passionate about patient care and cultivating the pharmacist-patient prescriber bond, and an avid proponent of equal access to healthcare and a firm believer in the power of education. Dr. Miller, only the educated are free. I think that is a very powerful statement, which leads us to Dr. Davis. Dr. Terrell Davis is the Executive Director of Public Affairs for the Wichita Public Schools. He also serves as a pastor of New Hope Baptist Church, Mr. Davis has over 20 plus years in education and has served as Mayberry, Dean Ray Stuckey, Truesdale Middle School. Mr. Davis is a past middle school principal of the year for the state of Kansas and a winner. He led Truesdale to being named Kansas Middle School of the Year. And Truesdale was a rough school when he went there. So, awesome to you. And then I'm going to have to wing it on Pastor Kevass Harding because I have a picture, but I don't have a bio. But Pastor Harding is the, let me do it. He is the pastor of Delrose United Methodist Church. He is the CEO and the proprietor of the what is your thing called? Oh gosh, I can see it in my head. It's green and blue. He has a oh, come on, tell me what it is. Help me. He has dry cleaners and a Martinizing, but I can't think of what it's called. ICT something. Unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, our legal business name is ICT Cleaners LLC, but we are franchise owners of Martinizing Dry Cleaners.
ICT.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're
okay.
right. We have 5 locations.
We're gonna talk. Right. Yeah, I was close. All right. Today we're talking from a perspective of Wichita, America, trauma, coming out of trauma, coming out of COVID, all of the things that we are all dealing with, processing through, and my questions just went away. So the first question I will ask each of you to kind of tell us is, why did you decide? Because when Miss Mary Dean, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hard to say no to Mary Dean, but when she asked you to come, why did you say yes? Let's start there. You'll have to unmute yourself to talk.
I can go ahead and take that. Well, I said yes
Awesome.
because I feel there's such a stigma in the Black community, especially regarding mental health care, right? Healthcare in general, but especially when it comes to mental health. As I tell my patients, just like we take care of if we have high blood pressure and we take something for that, or if we have a headache, we'll take something for that. We also have to take care of our mental health. It's such a vital part of the controls everything in our body. And if we don't have our mental state right, then we can not only can we not help ourselves, but we can't help others. That's why I decided to participate in that, and to bring awareness to the fact that we as people of color, we tend to hold things in or not address mental health issues because of that stigma. But they do affect our community as well, and proportionally as they do other communities. So we've got to acknowledge that. And the first step of acknowledging that is just talking about and having open dialogue about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I was
Tasha, hear me better now?
I was delighted that Ms. Dean invited me to speak on this panel, particularly as a male and African American man. One of the things I find challenging in our community is men acknowledging and speaking out and sharing that they are having challenges mentally, and mental health is not just schizophrenic or bipolar. It's anxiety, it's depression, it's even mood swings. And so in the midst of this pandemic, I think more men need to speak up, and because just as a pastor, the uptick just in domestic violence, children and spouses, And so this is a great opportunity just to share and talk and speak out the importance of keeping ourselves healthy mentally. That's my word now. We always say mental health. Let's stay healthy mentally. And that part of that is doing these kind of dialogues and panel discussions in our community.
Well, for me, it was pretty easy as a clinician. I'm a big advocate of getting out in the community, especially the Black community, talking about mental health, creating an open dialogue and letting people know that there is hope, you can do better, and it's okay. Especially over the last probably 2 years, I've seen an increase of people of color coming to get help. So I think the more we push that it's okay, my hope is that we will continue to see those numbers go up. And so it wasn't even a thought for me to join this event. So.
And for me, I was honored to be invited to be a part of the panel. When we look at our schools, we are microcosms of our community. And so if we know that there are issues within our community with mental health or folks struggling with dealing with the pandemic, then we've got to address it from our kids because they're going to come to school. And many times our parents may not be equipped to deal with their mental health state or with them dealing with crisis. And so I think it's important that we have supports in place in schools that we're able to help kids process this, not only the pandemic, but also process different kinds of issues that they're dealing with. And so that we can help them to be better citizens.
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. And I'm going to kind of pick up what Dr. Davis ended. As we look at the pandemic, as we look at COVID and kind of the things that are happening, I think Pastor Harding kind of alluded to it as well. We spent a lot of months from March, April into the beginning of May, all kind of being stuck at home. What are some of the things that you were seeing, whether that's in your practice, because Tasha's in practice, what were you seeing from a pharmaceutical standpoint of, was there an uptick in the drugs that are necessary to kind of mitigate and to bridge the gaps in mental wellness, which is what I prefer to call it. And then from a spiritual standpoint for Pastor Harding and Pastor Davis, what are you seeing the problems and the situations that are happening in families? So that's kind of what I would like for us to go into now. As this time where we've been stuck at home, what are the things that we are seeing, the upticks that we're seeing happening? Tasha, you want to start?
So when I think at the beginning, I had people on two separate spectrums. There were some people who were like, I knew something like this was coming because they already were dealing with some anxiety. And as time progressed, for them, they tended to cope okay, where other people who tend to function fairly well, and the longer as they were in the house, stuck with themselves, not able to distract, it was an uptick in the anxiety as well as some of the depression. And I think the biggest thing is that people weren't feeling comfortable to tell the people around them, like, I can't hold this. Like, I cannot talk about the pandemic right now. I don't want to talk about it because like people's containers are full. You can only hold so much. And I think that has been the thing that I have seen mostly is people are overwhelmed between the pandemic and the movement. It's like, but there's no boundary setting. No one's comfortable right now saying, hey, I can't hold that for you today. No, I don't want to talk about that today. Because you can stay informed without being engrossed in it. And it's trying to find that balance. And so I know the last couple of months I've been working with people like, what does that balance look like for you? So.
Tyler, what are you seeing?
So from a community pharmacy perspective, I have seen a lot of uptick as far as medications that are typically prescribed for anxiety or what we may classify as depression, and even other medical conditions that we could probably say what typically results when we have a general sense of panic throughout the country. So, for instance, you may have someone who had not taken their blood pressure medication in years, and then with everything that is going on, panic buying, they may start to do that. As far as a healthcare provider standpoint, and Tasha, I'm sure you're probably seeing some of this too. I am watching some of my pharmacists as well who have had to take a break or who have had to go on leave of absence because of the toll that it is taking on first responders themselves, as far as anxiety or fear or constantly coming into contact with these patients who may have COVID. I agree that in the beginning, we did not know how this was going to be, but here we are almost 8 months in, and this is somewhat of our new normal. But I believe the most important thing to anyone who is dealing with anything of this going forward is that we have to remember that it is a marathon and it's not a sprint. And I am starting to see the tides turning a bit as people are starting to come into this is our new normal. This is how we're going to have to deal with it and how it's going to affect us. And I find it interesting to see how this year, in about 10 years or so, how history is going to remember this, how it affected, how has it affected several populations, especially I'm interested in how it affects us as an African-American community and people of color.
Absolutely. Dr. Davis.
Yes, I think when we look at this, especially from a spiritual standpoint, we've got to deal with the fact that for our elderly members, our members who are, 60 plus, this was the first time in their life that they could not go to church. And the church has been their hub, has been their centerpiece, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it was, different movements throughout our time or throughout their lifetime. And so for the first time, they couldn't go to church, or they're not able to go to church because of the pandemic. And so most of them, or some of them, are not necessarily technologically savvy. And so even though churches went online, some of our elderly members still were unable to be there in person, or to hear it, or to watch it online. And so making sure that we are reaching out to our elderly members, making sure that we're very cognizant not only of their mental health piece, but also their spirituality piece, of making sure that they still feel connected to the local church. For some of our younger people, this was no big deal for them to switch from a in-person to an online setting because they do so much online, whether it be with their phones or computers or laptops or their iPads. And so for them, they didn't necessarily miss a beat. But I think for our elderly members, we've got to be so sensitive, especially when COVID is over, to make sure we reassure them that the church is a safe place, that society is a safe place, but also making sure that we're informing them of what the new normal is going to be. We're a close-knit community. We love to hug. We love to handshake. We love to greet each other and quote unquote fellowship in church. And our new normal is that we may not be able to fellowship in church like we used to for some time. And so how do we can still have the bond and the love with one another, but not the hugging and the embracing, and being able to share I love you through cards, through phone calls. On one end, it's a paradigm shift. On another end, it's a shift back to the past when our forefathers did used to call people. Before we had calling trees, you had the mothers of the church who picked up the phone and called everyone to let them know what was going on in church. And so I think it's that return to that telephone, but also how do we deal with when we are able to come back together and not be able to hug each other, but still feel the closeness of family.
Dr. Harding?
I'm gonna get back to the technology piece because that's very important. But I really want to speak on the spiritual piece that I discovered that I see in the midst of this pandemic. I believe that it takes the body of Christ or to be in a place of spirituality, because I believe it's with our spirituality that we're able to handle our mental health issues, our physical health issues, our emotional health issues, our financial issues, because I believe it all intertwines. So it's through our spirituality, our connection to God, that gives us the strength in the midst of this pandemic to take care of ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, and financially. And I believe a part of having a great mental health is having a great spiritual health. And so it does not matter what your religion is. I'm not here to promote Christianity. I'm speaking interfaith, whatever your belief or faith in. I believe it's connected to your spirituality. As a Christian, my faith is in Christ. And so that's where my spirituality connects. And so spiritually, that's where my discipline connects. So it's in that spiritual connection with God that I have the spiritual discipline to fast, to pray, to meditate, to stay in God's word. That gives me strength in the midst of this pandemic, because there's only so many movies you can watch a day. There's only so many games you can play before you start feeling like you're losing your mind. So you need to spiritually stay connected to God, the one who created you and who knows you. And so I really appreciate this panel that we can talk about the spirituality of it, because it's in that spirituality that we can connect and be stronger mentally and physically. And when the governor was talking about what needs to open and close, I understand that churches had to close. It's a hub for a virus. There's a large room gathering of people. But what made me laugh was when they began to call out what was essential enough to stay open. And one of those was liquor stores. And so here we are talking about mental health. If you're mentally going through depression, anxiety, frustration, and anger, sadness, to take a sedative, because alcohol is nothing more than a sedative, and you continue to drink it over and over, there's going to be problems in our home and issues. So spiritually, we need to understand that we need to keep, and I'll say more through the panel discussion about the importance of church and how technology is the future for the church.
Dr. Van, one other thing that came to my mind is that when we think about the spiritual piece of that, when we had Hurricane Katrina and people were displaced and they were in the Superdome, many folks were depressed. They were dealing with the anxiety of, am I ever going to be able to go home? One of the changes that happened, right, when the paradigm shift that happened, was when local pastors actually did a tour of the Superdome, and those families that were there were able to see their pastor live and in living color. It gave them hope that things were going to be okay. And so spiritually, our need that connection to see that pastor, and sad thing, to touch that pastor, hug that pastor. But when those pastors walked through the Superdome, those folks were able to see that God was in the building and that there was going to be hope in this situation.
So Dr. Davis, while you're on there, let's talk a little bit about education, because I think that was like totally a crazy piece. Kids went to spring break, and then they never went back to school. And that was it was a trip. I mean, when we think about mental wellness, part of that is that whole process of loss, and that process of, for lack of a better term, we go through that idea of loss with much like death, in the sense that now I have to have there's a grieving process. And I think a lot of our kids didn't know how to process that. What were you all kind of, I know that it was a hard decision on you all's part to make that happen, but what was happening?
Yeah, well, one of the first things is the governor made the right decision when she shut down schools. The reality is that the pandemic was just breaking out. We didn't have enough information, and the possibility of our kids being there and being transmitters of this and getting our teachers sick, but also getting kids sick, was just going to be there. And so I think the governor's decision was correct. just like our older members need to see their pastor, our kids need to see those teachers. They have connections with those teachers. Those teachers reassure them. When those kids get off the bus, when they see their teachers, they light up. And so I think in terms of education, we've got to be so sensitive to our kids coming back to make sure we give them avenues to process this, that we help them process this, that we sit down, whether it be through discussion, whether it be through writing, but we let our kids express what's going on. And then as educators, we've got to be intentional in terms of our kids lost 9 weeks of instruction. And so we've got to be intentional of not only teaching the new curriculum for the next year, but also backfilling the 9 weeks that they lost so that our kids don't have an academic issue going further, which then leads to a mental health issue. And so being able to fill in those gaps, being able to reassure kids that we know there are some concepts that you may be weak in only because you spent 9 weeks at home. But we're going to make sure you get caught up and make sure you're comfortable with the curriculum. But we're also going to push you that you've got to backfill and learn new stuff at the same time. But we're going to be there to support you through the entire process.
Yeah, I think that's going to be key as we look at how do we move forward. So Tasha, as you are seeing clients, what are some, and definitely, we understand that there's confidentiality, but what are some of those main kind of themes that you're seeing that maybe you weren't seeing before, but that are, really rising up as you're seeing your clients now?
I think I'm seeing a lot more, one, with my nurses and all the first responders, I see like they are developing trauma from being on the front lines with this. And it's hard for them because, typically the hospitals, our healthcare system is not set up to support the mental health component for those people who are providing those services. Then as well as I'm starting to see a lot of old stuff come up for people, being stuck in the house, not being able to escape as much, like all those things that people have been stuffing, it's coming up. And now it's like, now I got to deal with this. Those are the two main things. And for my little people, a lot of them, they're anxious because they don't understand. Because a lot of times us as adults, we don't have conversations with children. And you can, like they have language, they may not understand the same type of concepts, but you can speak to them in a way that they can. Because a lot of people aren't talking to the kids about what's going on. And so they're just confused. And so those are the main things that I'm seeing that are ticking up as the pandemic continues. I've seen a lot more cases of like FMLA, people needing time off of work too. I've never had so many, to do so many at once. Or even new intakes. I think this past month I got 16. That's not typical of that many people. And the interesting thing, at least 75% of them are people of color. So it's good, but being stuck in the house and things changing, it's really doing a number on, once again, it's about that, the window of tolerance. I think it is forcing people to look at like how much of life can they handle, and people are out of that window of tolerance, and so needing some additional help to kind of cope with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen, just watching Facebook, people's feeds, the amount of people that are saying, hey, does anybody know a therapist, that had not been a conversation before. Tyler, what are you seeing when we start to look at because Tasha brought up that, we've got these young people, they're confused. They are, some of them were already on meds. What are some things that you're kind of seeing around the pharmaceutical area when it comes to overdose?
So when I'm in my stores and talking to my pharmacists, I am starting to see an uptick of a lot of what would we call, not necessarily a sedative, but things that we would use to calm down or to help or to assist with anxiety. And we use antidepressants for those two. Small children are, and you have to think about the ones when we think about learning disabilities as well, such as ADHD or ADD, what those children are going through as well. So I'm seeing a spectrum of things when it comes to small children with that, and then not having an outlet. Even we can even talk to the ones who play sports, to who will help with the learning disabilities. There's so many different ways that it is affecting children that I believe we've got to stop and think through how the long-term effect that this is going to have on them with the things that are starting to manifest.
Thank you. Dr. Harding, as you, I know that you personally have talked about, and I wouldn't bring this up except for the fact that you have publicly talked about the fact that you have suffered from depression. How have you been able to cope? I know that you said that, prayer and reading, those things have been some of your mainstays, but what are some other things that you've had to do in order to be able to kind of make sure that you were staying on top of that?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question. And again, I love what you just said, that don't ever hate to bring that up. I think it's so important that we always lift up, particularly with mental health, if we've had challenges. And particularly for me, I was actually diagnosed borderline chronically depressed. So I was in depression, but I was almost at a place of chronically being depressed. But what helped me, as you just said, was, again, going back to spiritual discipline, acknowledging and finding out for myself. So you don't know until you go. And I think so many men don't go to their yearly doctor and take physicals and tell them what's going on. So they can give you a prescription for a therapist to sit down on the couch and then pour out what's going on to find out that you are at a place of depression. We go to the eye doctor for every year to get our eyes done. We wear gloves, and they're the same thing as in their prescription as well. We're afraid to get a prescription for our mental health, but we are never afraid to go get prescription for our eyeglasses. But they both help us stay focused. So what kept me focused and what helps me is my spiritual discipline, physical, working out, golfing, activities, hobbies, family, friends, not associates, but real close friends, those you can, cry out to, as David did in the book of Psalms, to cry out to the Lord, to cry out to your friends, those who won't beat you up or bash you for saying that you're suffering with an illness called depression, and who will hold you up in the midst of your anxiety, because it all ties in together, particularly as a pastor, and particularly as African-American pastors. A lot of us don't even know we're depressed because we're trying to suppress it. We're trying to keep it down, that we're doing well. And then we try to medicate it with alcohol and any other drugs that are available for us to take, from NyQuil. I know all the things I did. NyQuil with those little pills you take before you go to bed, or you take all the cough syrup. You do anything to get your mind at ease, or to be pushed away. But none of that, all of that is just temporary. And what's lasting is a spiritual connection. And again, I say that because I don't want people to always think I'm talking Christianity. Whatever your faith is, you have to be connected to that source. The source is what gives us strength. It's what gives us the energy to run. I always use the analogy of a vacuum cleaner. I brought one in one of my sermons. I brought a vacuum cleaner in one time. I said, here's this vacuum. It's beautiful. It's lovely. It does a great work, but it's doing nothing but sitting here until I plug it into the source. And so that is us. We look good. We dress up good on the outside. We're beautiful. But we're not plugged in, and we're about to drain and die and fall out. And that's what's going on even in the midst of this pandemic. We have to stay plugged into our spiritual source, stay plugged into our families, stay plugged into our health physically, again, physically, spiritually, mentally, and emotion, because mental and emotional intertwine. And particularly for my African-American men, but my sisters, very needed to understand, when you're feeling emotional, that's dealing with your mental also. And so that is a very key place where you can need to say, I need to move more spiritually to get through whatever I'm going through. So that's what has helped me. And I can say more, but due to time, I'm gonna be quiet.
Thank you. Dr. Davis, Pastor Harding was talking about spirituality, and came up on feed that said, this is great, but really, can God be the answer to everything? Dr. Davis, is God the answer to everything?
One word, absolutely. You know, God is the center of my relationship. And so when I think about my mental capacity, my mental health, I go back to God, and I make sure that I try to stay centered in God. With that, though, God will lead us to therapists to be able to discuss things. God will lead us to pharmacists to be able to get prescriptions. I think Pastor Kevass is absolutely correct in terms of having that relationship, that spiritual relationship, but also being able to hear God and being able to be directed to a physician where we can get additional services as well.
And I would also say, because I love the question, because it says, Pastor, really, can God answer everything? Well, in my faith, you always got to remember, I'm not trying to give you this and tell you to do this, but in my faith, God is the answer for me. But God, like Pastor Davis just said, your faith is your strength. But if you have a prescription, take it. Don't say, I don't need that. God is my everything. You know, I've heard people, I don't need to take this medication because God me. I have faith in God. I've heard, this goes back to this whole mask issue. Should I wear a mask or not? No, I'm not wearing a mask because I have faith in God. Well, I have faith in God, but I still put my seatbelt on. I have faith in God, but when I wake up, I still put my contacts in my eyes so I can see. I have faith in God, but I still clean my chicken before I cook it. You see. So we try to say faith covers all that. Faith is a personal piece, but in your faith, you have God also given us common sense to live as beings on this earth to do the right thing. And so when I hear, is God everything? Well, personally, God is everything for me, but He's giving me the wisdom, the knowledge, and understanding to live in this world we live in and use the tools that we have created as human beings to make ourselves better, being medication, being physical fitness, being eating the right food. So I just wanted to say that. I could go on, but again, let me be quiet.
So Pastor Davis, let me come back to you just one more time, and I'll come back to you ladies in just a second. But I think you brought up a point that, you know, God, we go to God, we pray, we have, you know, yes, He is everything, but there is a piece in which we need help. And as a Black church for I've been in Black church all my life, we tend to say that, you know, therapist and all of those things, oh, that's the devil. You know, we like anything we can't describe and we can't figure out and we can't put our finger on, we call it the devil. So talk a little bit more, Pastor Davis, about why that we should be looking at therapists or any of those other kinds of things that we need to, the services to surround ourselves with. Why are those important?
Well, I mean, when we look at it from an Old Testament perspective, God says, I'll provide for you, but He still used the ravens to feed the prophet. And so God will use earthly things to take care of things. God is my healer, but He'll also use the doctor to diagnose me and to prescribe me something for whatever my illness is. In the Black church, you know, we've always had a stigma about mental health, and we've had a stigma about other social issues. And as we look at it, you know, part of the job of the contemporary pastor is to be able to break down those walls so that our members understand that, yes, I'm your pastor, I'm your spiritual leader, but you may have some deeper trauma that I may not be able to deal with. You may be dealing with molestation. You may be dealing with incest, rape. You may be dealing with some things that spiritually, yes, I can provide you scripture. I can pray with you. I can pray for you. I can be a sounding board for you. But if you're going to truly be totally healed, not only spiritually, but mentally and physically, you may have to see a doctor. You may have to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. You may have to process this a little bit deeper so that you can get into the internal hurt that you have. You know, I've been able to counsel and been blessed to counsel some people that may have been strippers or things like that. And in sitting down and having a conversation with a 30-year-old lady across from me, really, I'm having a conversation with a 9-year-old young girl because something happened at 9 that she never got healed from, never developed from. And yes, she's 30. She has the body of a 30-year-old. She has the mannerisms of a 30-year-old, but she still has the mental capacity of a 9-year-old. And so when the church deals with the fact that we have a lot of members who have deep internal hurt, that yes, we're going to heaven, but we got to get beyond heaven and deal with why you're here on earth going to heaven. How can you be mentally stable, mentally thriving? How can you be healed? All those things. And being able to access the great things that God has blessed us with is where we've got to be at as a church, that we've got to tell people, listen, there is some hurt that I'm going to address. There's some hurt that I'm going to refer you to some other professionals to address. You know, if a member comes in and they've got a broken leg, yes, I'm going to pray for them. Yes, I'm going to lay hands on them, but I'm also going to send them to their doctor to get a cast and get their leg reset and send them, to a rehab person that they can work those muscles. And so I think the church has to be holistic as we're looking at people, and we have to understand that God will supply all of our needs. God is a healer, but God uses doctors in the process for the healing.
Absolutely. I totally appreciate that. So we're going to take that and we're going to go to Tasha. So Tasha, as he started to talk about trauma, and I think he hit on a great point that we only mature to the place of our hurt. So when there is a place when we've been hurt, or when there's a trauma, or when there has been something that's happened in our life, our chronology keeps going, but our maturation stops. And so how do we start to deal, you said too, that, as people are at home and they're stuck at home, they're thinking about all of those things that happened in the past. How do we really begin the past and push into and not be afraid to really have those tough conversations with our past? Because and maybe as you get started, let's define trauma so people really know what that is, and then go into that.
So trauma is anything that my brain cannot process. Anything that's happened in my brain cannot process. A lot of times people think of trauma and it always has to be these big things. But it can be, I call them big T's and little T's. A lot of little traumas that we normalize in the Black community growing up, that can lead to even a complex PTSD, which is more difficult to deal with just than normal PTSD. And so trauma can be just being bullied at school. If my brain cannot process through that, then that is trauma. And a lot of people come in the office and they're like, oh no, I don't have any trauma. And then they're telling me these stories. I'm like, well, yeah, that's trauma. And so it's anything you cannot process through. And then in regards to the process, like of getting the biggest fear is that we don't want to go there because we don't think it's going to stop. We don't want to touch it. We don't want to look at it because, like, if I feel that feeling won't stop, and it will. Like, our bodies are not designed like that, but you have to acknowledge it first. I can't give you directions to my home if you don't tell me where you're at, right? You're just going to be driving around, going nowhere. And so the first step is being able to acknowledge, like, this doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good, and it wasn't okay, right? And then you can get into the process of it. But you got to be willing to sit with it. You can't just go to therapy or go and talk to a friend and think, I just want to talk about it and move on. That's not how it happens. There's a process through it because our little inner children are wounded. So yeah, this little 9-year-old in me is sometimes showing up trying to make my adult decisions, and it causes issues. That's why 9-year-olds don't have careers. That's why that's why they're not married. And a lot of people, we develop these disruptive patterns of behaviors. But I have to acknowledge the behavior pattern is disruptive to address it. And then I have to get past my unhealthy ego and say, well, it's really about this piece of me who believes that I'm not good enough. And we don't like to do that Because we say, well, everybody.
That's good. That's good.
Talking about you and that false belief system that you've been running away from your whole life. And I think that is the first place to get through it.
Yeah. Let me before you get off, let me ask you this, because kind of with the church and with Black family as a whole, one of the things that we talk about, and we, I think we all have said at some point is what happens in this house stays in this house. We know that sometimes what happens in this house was killing us, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, sometimes physically, because we may be being molested, or we are acting out in sorts of ways. I mean, as Black people, sometimes we tend to, but that is a compensating factor, and why we choose to eat the things we do and why we do the things we do, whether that's with drugs, alcohol, or sex, or any of those sorts of things. Sometimes that's because we're compensating for those things that we've been told what happens in this house stays in this house. Let's talk about that just a little bit, because I think that's one of those things that really kind of jacks us up. As a school teacher for 20 years, sometimes kids would come and tell me stuff, and I'd be like, "Whoa, baby, stop. First of all, I have to do something with that if we go too much further. But second of all, that's your mama's business." But I know that they wanted to tell me because they trusted me. So how do we deal with that?
So I think the first step is to not, just because I can handle it, that doesn't mean I will. I think we as a people, like, we are strong and we are resilient, but just because I can take something, that don't mean I will. That don't mean I have to. And there's a difference between secrets. Secrets, that's that yucky piece. That's that dark piece that we can't tell what happened in this house stays in the house. That's a difference between something being private and something being confidential. Right. And so I think we have to.
Good. That's good.
Like, if I feel like this is a secret, like I cannot tell anybody, then I probably need to be talking to somebody about that. Versus if I feel like this is private and I don't want to share it, that's not the same. Right. And so I think we mix all those different things together. And part of it, it's over time. It's over time. These things, I mean, even if you look at post-traumatic slave syndrome, I mean, it's been passed on to us that we hold secret. We don't talk about what's happening. By doing so, we come at a cost. Right. And I think each of us have an individual responsibility to open up those dialogues and change that narrative. I think that answers your question.
Right. Yeah. Tyler, you started shaking your head immediately. Come on, talk to me about that. Because you immediately were like, oh yeah.
I think that's one of the hardest part when I see patients who have I like to say sort of relapsed or just decided, I'm just not going to take this antidepressant anymore, or I'm not going to take this to help me with my anxiety anymore. It's because we have this stigma, right? That some of these things are it's family. What goes on in this house stays in this house. I'm okay. I don't need that. But the first step to any of this is admitting and having the courage to know, okay, I need to get help. Okay. I think we, especially as people of color, we eat so many things as Black men and Black women, and we are just we're used to, how can we say, I guess, so much trauma, and we can say maybe systemic racism in a sense too, that we just hold on to those things instead of facing them head on. And by the time that when we get to a place, we just erupt, right? And if we had addressed it in the first place, we would not have gotten there. So a big piece of that is when I, talking to patients about if they're just starting something that may be for depression or maybe for anxiety. This does not mean that you are a failure. This does not mean that something is wrong with you. This takes courage to get to this point that, okay, I need help, to deal with it, or I have a problem. And so I want to stress that piece too, to people in our community. We've got to overcome the stigma that you're worried about, oh, I need medication to function, or I have to have this to be able to speak or to make me feel better. You'll be surprised how many people around you of all different shades and colors need the same things to function daily throughout life. Another thing I want to stress is that, you know, when you reach that point where you decide in your mind, I don't need to take this anymore. Please do not. A lot of these drugs and medications you cannot stop abruptly, because sometimes you'll be worse off than you were if you did not take them, because you can go through withdrawal symptoms, which can be, and I'm sure, Tasha, you can attest to this. I'm sure you have a conversation with a lot of your patients with this as well. You cannot stop those abruptly. You'll be worse off sometimes before than when you started taking them. So I just want to stress that piece of, it takes courage to get to that point to, okay, I'm going to see my doctor today. I'm not feeling well. When I think about this thing, it may cause me hives, and my arms may start shaking, or my chest may get tight. I may have trouble breathing. It takes courage to acknowledge that. And even to the point where, okay, I need a mental health day. I need to take a day off work to have a mental health day. I cannot deal with it anymore. I need to sit back and take time to reflect on what I need to do for me. So that takes courage, and we can't be afraid to flex that courage muscle and a step back and know when we need to take a time out.
Right. So let's stay right there, Tyler, because I think that one of the things that we really deal with medication is that a lot of people they do stop. You know, they get to feeling better. It's like, you know, you take those 5 of penicillin, and, you know, it's supposed to be 10 days, but by day 5, you feel good. And by day 7, you're like, I don't really need to take the rest of this. And so because they have gotten a good balance going, and then they stop, and we have these relapses, and we've had a couple of issues here in Wichita where we've had someone who, you know, maybe was off their meds, had some issues going on, some stuff happening, and you know, they had an altercation with the police. And I think we don't have these conversations enough. So let's talk a little bit more about that medication piece, and how does that really pan out, and what should we be doing with that?
So I think the biggest thing is we cannot be afraid to go to the doctor and say, I need help with that, right? And then once you are prescribed, or you start something, I know instances where bottles will just sit, right? Will just sit on the counters because next I have to have the courage to take it. Or if, oh, I'm feeling better after a week, then I'm gonna stop it. In reality, most of these medications take about 4 to 6 weeks before you reach the true effect. So when I'm saying that, I mean, like when we talking about antidepressants is typically something we may do. So maybe like Zoloft or Lexapro. All right. You cannot just stop those abruptly, because you will go through withdrawal symptoms. And sometimes people may feel like they don't have the financial means to cover these medications. And there's always resources available to take these to help with costs as well. One of those is needymeds.org that you can go to. You always also have access to care, different options, ComCare, Hunter Health Clinic. There are several different options and things that we can do. The biggest thing, though, I cannot stress this enough, is that we just cannot stop those abruptly. And you always need to consult your prescriber before deciding to do so. And I'm gonna say that about any medication. That's I guess the pharmacist in me. When we can't expect to change if we're not doing everything that we need to be doing to help that change, right? We can't say, oh, I'm feeling better, my blood pressure went down today, so I'm gonna skip this pill tomorrow. No, you know, because anything can happen and trigger to offset those things. And especially now with the trauma and stress we're going through as a world, just in general, right? So we've got to be sure that we lean into these things and do our part too to contribute to making ourselves better.
Thank you. Yes. So Tyler brought up triggers, and I think triggers are a very important thing, because I think a lot of us have gone through KLC, and a lot of us have looked at some psychological sorts of educational pieces. And in doing that, before I have to know what triggers are, I have to know the things that push my button. So Dr. Davis, talk to us a little bit about education as it pertains to triggers. And, as we're looking at all the things that are happening in our system, what are some of those things? I know that you guys are having some psychology and some people in that behavior piece. So kind of talk to us about what you're doing with triggers in the school system.
Well, yes. Under our current new superintendent, Dr. Alicia Thompson, we were able to launch. Actually, we were on the forefront of the new mental health intervention program for the state of Kansas, and actually helped develop that program, where we wanted to take the stigma of mental health or kids receiving mental health services away. And so we were able to work with some local representatives to do a $10 million allocation, and we were able to get about $6.5 million for Wichita, that we were able to put therapists inside of our schools. And we've done that now for the last 2 years, but have therapists inside our schools where they can not only provide services to the kid, but also to the families. And this mental health program is very innovative. One of the things that we discovered is that our families trust our public schools more than they trust the mental health services or mental health agency. And so we wanted families to be comfortable or feel comfortable coming to us and receiving those services inside our school. We had upwards over 700 kids who've been able to be in the program in the last couple of years. And so we're seeing a real impact in terms of improved behavior, in terms of improved attendance, and improved academics. And so we know that when our kids are healthy, both physically and mentally, they do better and they feel better. And they're able to achieve the things that they have for their life. And so being able to have those services there, but also the importance of school counselors. Our counselors are vital to our schools. Many of our kids, that is the only confidant they have. And so our kids really access our counselors. They go in, they have lunch with our counselors. Our counselors do small groups, and they're able to really, process with kids what's going on. A third grader who parents are going through a divorce, and they just found out the news yesterday, but they're coming to school today. Somebody has to help their kid. Before we think they're going to learn reading and writing and math, someone has to process with their kid just what life is going to be about. When that kid doesn't know if dad's going to be home when I leave home, if we're going to stay at the same place. And so when we look at trauma and look at some of the issues that our kids are dealing with, we're trying to put a robust wraparound services for our kids, whether it be the mental health pilot, whether it be our counselors, and then those teachers are absolutely just important to all of our kids. If you want to know how important a teacher is, go to any kindergarten room and watch the start of the day. Those kids run to their teachers. Why? Because that teacher makes them feel safe, makes them feel loved, and makes them feel important. And so we need, as a society, to value our teachers even more, because we understand how important their role is with our kids. And so our kids come with trauma, and not just our female kids or not just our poor kids. All of our kids are experiencing some form of trauma in their lives, and it's up to us as educators and community members to really help them in that. Our young men are going through issues, and how do we meet our young men at the bus, process with them so that they're not going through the day angry or going through the day confused about some things? How do we process with them that they realize, hey, life is valuable, and I'm not going to shoot someone because I can't bring their life back. But likewise, I'm not going to kill myself over something that is temporary for those of us who have lived longer. We know it's temporary, but they think it's life and death. And so being able to sit down with that kid, to listen to what they have to say, and to really process. And then my final thing, and when you talked about what's said in the house or happens in the house, stays in the house, one of the biggest things that we have to understand is that our teachers, our school staff, they're mandatory reporters. And so when kids are reporting abuse or situations in the house, we have to report that to the authorities. But then the second part, and this is where the church is vitally important, we've got to educate parents to understand. When your boyfriend went in and touched your daughter and she told her school counselor, principal, teacher, and that young man was arrested, you do not go back and retaliate against your baby for reporting that. If what's happening in the house is killing me, then we've got to tell somebody. We can't allow those things. And so being able to talk to the family, that we are able to counsel the family, they understand, ma'am, you know what? As a single young lady, if you're going to date, don't date with your kids. Don't have these people around your kids that you don't really know yet. Spend some time to get to know them away from your kids. And then letting your kids know, listen, there is nothing we can't talk about. And so if something happens, whether it be at our house or at a relative's house or even down the street, please come and talk to me, because mom or dad will always protect you. So having those boundaries, having those open dialogues with our kids, not only in school, in church, and in society.
Absolutely. So he kind of was alluding to the fact that we really have to have those conversations with our young men. So Dr. Harding, if you can kind of talk about how do we deal with triggers as it pertains to young men? We've seen the astronomical amount, and we've been kind of talking about COVID, but you know, in this whole pandemic, we've had kind of two things going. We've had a racial pandemic that has just exploded, and we've also had this economic and this sickness sort of pandemic kind of happening. So we've kind of had three things happening at the same time. So if you could kind of talk about how do we deal with triggers as it pertains to young men or men in general, because you know it's our men are dying in our streets, and we're watching it on television.
Yes. First of all, just say Black lives do matter. And as we say, all God's children matter. But in this particular question, you're talking about Black lives matter too, if people don't understand that. And when it comes to African-American men, and I include African-American women, because we had a young lady also in Kentucky, shot in her own home and killed, shot 8 times, sleeping in her own bed. So it's a mental, no, let me tell you this. Let me say it this way. It's a health issue just being Black in America.
Yeah.
Male, female. It's a health issue being Black in America from the beginning of America. The original sin called racism, slavery. We have been pushed into this place mentally. And so as Black men, Black women, we have, you know, and the police, and I was a police officer for 5 years. So I have respect for good policing. I have respect for community policing, but I have no tolerance for horrible, violent, racist police officers. And the police, with this original sin, was to oversee us as slaves. That was their original job, to oversee us. And here we are moving into 2020. And I just love, Tasha, you spoke of it earlier, talking about the PTSD with the post-traumatic stress disorder, which I dealt with as a pastor, with just being a pastor dealing with Hagar's children. But we're still dealing with the PTSS, which is the post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so not only are we dealing with racism, but also colorism. You know, the lighter you are, the closer you are to the house, and the darker you are, the further you away from the field. And so we even have this internal fight with each other just on the colors. But when you deal with where we are right now with this pandemic, you're dealing with this economic crisis that we're in. Unemployment ends at the end of this month. Congress has not done nothing yet. When you're dealing with police brutality, this is a heavy load on the African American community, spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and don't forget financially. And so this is why I believe what we're doing today is so powerful and prudent, that we don't stop taking our meds, that we stay connected through Zoom or however way we can to share our stories. And when you say triggers, all of this triggers all of us, and if you're talking to the African American men, this is where depression sets in. This is where anger sets in. This is where violence set in. An uptick in our own community. Nihilism in Chicago. We had 135 people shot by our own selves. What is this? Because of this oppression, depression, holding us down, and so people are, this is like a volcano. You keep pushing it down, eventually it erupt. And so we need to have more conversations like this. I think there needs to be more Zoom meetings like this, where we can cry out, where we can really just say, I'm pissed, I'm angry, I'm mad as hell. I need help with my rent. I need help with my medication. I need health insurance. I'm running out of unemployment. Where we need to come together and speak this and allow people to know that there's an outlet, and this place is here, and how we can help each other. And then we continue to do what we're doing right now, is telling our local, state, and federal government that we need help spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. Because at the end of the day, all this ties into racism and poverty. And this is dealing with the essential workers who have to go to work, who have 4 generations in one house, and they're struggling to keep food on the table and their lights on. And so this is very important, and I just think we need to continue to talk about it. And you talk about what triggers, that's what triggers me, that we don't talk enough about this.
Thank you. So Tyler, as we are talking about triggers, and we're talking about young men, what are some things that you're seeing? How in the pharmaceutical world, how does that, I'm sure, being a Black woman and not having a lot of African Americans in pharmacy, what are you seeing? Those social, those microaggressions. Make sure you take yourself off mute.
There we go. Having a conversation with myself. So
Right.
I think the biggest thing that when it comes to these medications and such too, right? These microaggressions and these triggers, African American males, right? We get it worse, right? Because as Dr. and Reverend Dr. Harding said, we already got strikes against us, right? One, because of our color, okay? So you're dealing with that. And then we've got the racism, which we know has been happening, but I think especially now that's heightened, right? That is going on. So you add into the fact that I may potentially have to take a medication to help me cope with these things that are going on. And it makes it even more challenging or difficult to grasp, or thinking, what is wrong with me where I need this help, or I have to take these things. When in reality, as I just keep speaking to this courage that we have to stand up and admit that I know something is wrong and I'm going to seek help. And when we think about pharmaceutical intervention, not everything needs to be solved with medication. We can see a therapist. We can do talk, find different ways to take out things. For me personally, I will share that I color with stress at work or what's going on. So different ways for us to, and that's what Dr. Davis talked about. There's different ways that we need to be able to express or have these outlets, and it doesn't have to always come back to that. To medication, but that's all a part of it too. Acknowledging is the biggest part of it. I think for us as males, and even thinking about some of the side effects of the medications that typically treat anxiety or depression or help with mental health, is it may be impotence or sexual dysfunction, and that's a hard thing for us for males to grasp, right? Any males. Particularly probably African American males as well. So we've got to get out of that stigma, though. and look at the bigger picture. You know, that's a temporary side effect, right? But it's helping me overall with the bigger picture of that. So when we look at the holistic approach, that's how Dr. Davis was saying, we as healthcare providers and as people of the community have to look at how it's affecting us in our relationship with Christ and with God, how it's affecting us in our home lives and our work lives. We have to, and a good healthcare provider, I will say, looks at the holistic approach when we're speaking with patients who deal with these things.
So let me ask you this before you go away. We don't have a nutritionist on here, which I wish we, you know, in hindsight, I wish we would have. For people that are, you know, saying, hey, you know, I really don't want to take medication, mainly because there's, you know, there's side effects, and I just would really like to be able to figure out how to do this naturally. What is your philosophy about that? You know, there are, you know, for years and years and years, hundreds of years, you know, especially in African populations, we dealt with a lot of things through natural means. So I know that kind of goes against some of the things, but I know that when we look at a holistic approach, one of them is looking at our food. And so what is your philosophy with that?
To me, that doesn't go against anything at all, okay? Because that's a part of the holistic approach. And a lot of times, some of the medications that we use are based off of the holistic or a natural component, especially for us in the African American setting. But there's also important, and I want to stress this as well, that natural things have side effects too. So we've got to be educated about things. And in the same instance, if we pick up Tylenol over the counter or ibuprofen over the counter and just start adding it to our regimen, you still have to let your doctor know about these things, because it can interact with other things that you are taking. So the big thing is this education when it comes to that. That's all part of the holistic approach. But you've got to let your healthcare provider know, or you've got to research on your own as well. Okay. Another point that I like to bring up here is that, you know, sometimes we as African Americans, we tend to put a lot of faith, or people of color, in our provider. And I tell everyone all the time, no one knows your body like you do. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of what we have healthcare professionals telling us. So don't be afraid when you know that something is wrong, or I don't feel right, to seek help or to speak out. They call it, we're practicing medicine and practicing pharmacy for a reason, because we're truly practicing. We don't know the answer to everything, right? And we rely on you for that as well as a patient. But you've got to communicate with us those changes and things that you're going through and experiencing that are not right, so we can help you get to find the diagnosis and get to that issue.
Thank you. So Tasha, let's talk about advocacy and as it comes to with our triggers. So Tyler said that, you know, hey, we really have to look at, and we have to know our bodies. We have to know when things have changed. We have to know when, you know, this may or may not be working. And it, you know, just because it works for someone else may not necessarily mean that it works for my chemistry. How do we advocate for ourselves when we're coming in, when we're having those conversations? What are ways in which we can advocate for ourselves?
I always well, the first thing is ask questions. Like I tell my clients, you don't have to be okay with anything. You don't have to be okay with what I say. You don't have to be okay with what the doctors say. Like, you have to advocate for yourself. But I think sometimes you need someone to be with you, particularly when you're at medical appointments and those types of things. But also do your research. I think there is a power differential when you're in those situations where you're talking to a therapist, or you're talking to a prescriber, or your doctor, or a pharmacist. I think the biggest thing you can do is just ask why. I'll ask, I don't care what it is, like, why? Why do I, like, what are the other options? I always tell people, you're your best advocate. No one can read your mind. And if you just suffer in silence, now you're perpetuating the trauma that you've already experienced. And so knowing that you don't have to be okay with anything, regardless of what it is. And so I think the first step is knowing your body, one, like recognizing when like this doesn't feel comfortable, and not just pushing it away. Once again, like I said earlier, we as a people, we have the ability just to get through stuff, but we don't have to. If I'm taking something and I think it makes me feel funny, I'm going to let somebody know. If I'm going into a doctor's appointment or see a therapist and they're saying, hey, I think you may have this, I'm going to have them explain it to me. Because a lot of times healthcare professionals just sit in the mode and they're just talking, moving on, talking, moving on. Not a lot of explanation is happening. So I think it comes back that you have a responsibility to yourself to clarify things. And if not, if you don't feel like that's something that you can do, take someone with you so they can advocate on your behalf.
And as you're looking at that, as you're looking at advocating, as you're looking at what is happening, how do I identify that, what are my real triggers? Because as I'm coming in, as I'm trying to figure all these pieces out, I'm seeing stuff on Facebook, I'm seeing stuff on the news, I'm seeing stuff, I'm bombarded with media all around me. How do I know and how do I identify what are truly triggers for me?
I think one of the biggest things, when I find myself perseverating over something, when I cannot stop thinking about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, or when I find myself down the rabbit hole, I'm searching. But the primary thing is knowing your body and paying attention whether my body temperature is changing, whether I'm getting a little shaky, those different types of things. Because, we have shock system. My parasympathetic shock system may kick in, and now all I want to do is sleep. I'm tired all of a sudden. All I want to do is watch TV. Like, that's a sign that I'm functioning in parasympathetic shock. It's also the freeze response. It's the couch potato. That's a freeze response. And if I'm in that sympathetic, like I'm just overstimulated. I'm trying to find something to do, trying to stay busy, racing thoughts, those types of things. But your body is listening to you way before your mind is. Your body is telling you something is off. And it can look like trying to be a busy bee, eating, not eating. And I think it's important that when we are feeling well, take note of that. Take note of what is my body feeling like. So then when I'm off balance even a little bit, I know, hey, something's going on. I need to address it. Because a lot of times if I find myself thinking about this, it's a beautiful distraction, so I don't have to deal with this, right? So I can't stop thinking about the pandemic, and I'm thinking about it's a beautiful distraction for me dealing with my anxiety about me losing my job. So what I'm doing, I'm just constantly researching different COVID things, when the real issue is that I am overwhelmed and afraid of my financial situation.
Thank you. That was really good. I think that, a lot of times we do that. We are focused on something, but that's really not the issue. It's kind of, for lack of a better term, it really wasn't about the toilet paper or the toilet seat or the toothpaste. It was really something else, but we took it out on that. Let's talk. We've got maybe about 10 minutes left, and I want us to really have this final kind of conversation around how do we move forward? What are some steps? What are some real concrete things as we think about moving from darkness to light? That's a spiritual concept. We move from darkness to light. We move from being in so much trauma to the place of walking in a space of freedom and deliverance in that sense. And so let's really kind of have that conversation. What are some things that we really need to be doing and really need to be putting in place to walk in that freedom as we come out? How long? I think that's kind of the hard part about this pandemic piece, is we don't know when we're going to be done. We don't know when we'll be able to walk around without a mask. We might not ever be able to walk without a mask again. We might not ever be able to hug and to love each other the way we have before. We don't know. And that, I think, is kind of the hard part. Josh was kind of talking, is just that, we're doing things because we don't know how or don't know what's going to happen. So let's kind of have the conversation for the next few minutes about How do we move forward from this? Okay. Dr. Davis, you want to go first? I saw you writing, so.
I am, and I'm going to address it.
How are we going to progress?
Yeah, I'm going to address it from the school perspective. So I'm going to say first, enroll your kids. Absolutely, in the next couple of days, get your kid enrolled in school. And then secondly, pick a learning option that is best for you and your family, whether that be in person, whether that be one of our extended learnings or our online learning. Take care of that first and foremost, because that will take some of the stressors off of your kid, is knowing some of that information, having some of those definites. Then secondly, taking every advantage of everything the school district is going to offer you in terms of tutoring, in terms of any kind of support systems in place. Please take advantage of that. If you know that your kid needs some additional support, whether it be with mental health, whether it be with behavior, please make sure you're talking to your administrator about being a part of the mental health pilot, the mental health intervention pilot, so your kid can get the wraparound services that they need. And then thirdly, if you know that you have a kid who's struggling, whether they're aggressive or making sure they get into some kind of athletics, or making sure they're getting some kind of martial arts where they can learn some discipline to really calm them down in some areas and give them some life lessons. One of the greatest things I think that a lot of Black males can say is that athletics really saved our life, because it gave us the discipline and gave us something to live for until we saw the bigger picture. And so I think doing some of those things, and then I would say finally having a good conversation and definition with your kid, especially if they're a Black male, about this issue of respect. You asked about triggers earlier. You know, when I was a kid, the big trigger was boy. We don't want anyone to call us a boy. Well, now our big trigger with African American males is respect.
Right.
They disrespected me. My teacher disrespected me. And so really defining what is respect for your kid so they can be successful in the year.
So before we go from you, Dr. Davis, explain those three options, because I think people are real confused about what those are. I've had people ask me. And so explain those three options. You know, yes, I could go to my physical school, but what are the other two options, and what are the differences in those three options?
Yes. So one is the in-person, I'm going to school as I normally have been. Two is my remote learning, where your kid is still enrolled at their base school, but the school is sending you information. There is technology provided to you that your kid is continuing with your education during the same school hours as they would be if they were in person. And then the third is our new online curriculum, online program that you can sign up for. Imagination Academy, which is an excellent opportunity for kids who are apt to do online learning, purely online learning. And so you can sign up with that. All of them have teachers assigned to it. And so you'll have supports in terms of instruction. But the curriculum will be a little bit different in terms of how that curriculum is delivered to you.
So in number two, I'm actually with my regular teacher. I'm online, but we're walking through that day. We're doing it by computer.
Yes. And you may not necessarily be with that same third grade teacher, though, maybe another third grade teacher, but you stay within that school community in the my remote learning.
Okay. That's been a real question, is people were like, there's these three options, but I don't know what these are. And so we want to make sure that while we have the opportunity to ask questions, that we are doing that. Okay, Dr. Harding.
Moving forward from walking from darkness to light, first thing we need to do is vote. Go vote. John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, who just passed away. Let him not die in vain, and all of those civil rights activists who did so much for us to where we are today. And so as I put on my activist hat and my bootleg politician, because I have a minor in politics, I've been in politics, that John Lewis says this to all of us: go get in good trouble. That's how we move forward. We continue to march. We continue to non-violently protest. We continue as the body of Christ, because when we say church, we think of a building, but the body of Christ, we have to continue to stay connected, again, physically, mentally, and again, spiritually, going through those whole components. But we have to continue to get in good trouble. We can no longer stay hidden. And one step that we definitely need to know, that we're in the midst of this pandemic, and that we have to weather this storm. This is a storm. We just got through the storm, but the blizzard's not here, I believe. And so we have to be prepared for the blizzard. So we've gotten through the real quick storm that blew over, and the hail came and put some houses out, and we all had to go in and bunker and hide. But now we have to know how to live in the midst of this blizzard. That means, how do we do school? How do we do church? It's a technology. So me, as I wanted to get to this, I'm looking at the time. We got 5 minutes because I want my sisters to speak. But the church, the body of Christ, myself, moving forward, we had to go full throttle on technology. We can't expect to do everything. And it blessed me, because I thought, I went into a place of depression thinking, oh God, no one's going to be in church. How do we continue to do ministry? How do I pay people? And then all of a sudden God showed me this avenue: Facebook Live, YouTube Live. So we have social media technology. And so we do help out and reach out to those who don't have these technologies. But now we're trying to connect with our Cox Communication. How do we partnership with them to help people who don't have these resources in their home? So we're looking for not only equality, but equity. How do we help those in poverty who needs to want to stay home as parents, but they don't have the funds to put Cox Communication? Where's the like Hope CDC having funds to help this family connect to our school districts, to be still in a place engaged in learning? So those are the things forward. Technology that the church must do. Voting, continue to march, stay in good trouble, and continue to weather this storm.
Thank you. Tyler, how do we move forward?
We move forward by having the courage to speak up, not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to seek help, not being afraid to ask questions, having open dialogue with your healthcare providers, with your families, with your friends, with each other, and just facing the situation head on, by not, we talk about sweeping this under the rug, or not acknowledging, or hiding from things that we need to face. I think I just like to end with this, that poet and essayist James Baldwin said it best: not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed unless it is faced. So we have got to have the courage to face it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tasha, how do we move forward?
I think the first thing is recognize that, we all have the right to occupy our space. Like, you have a right to occupy your space in this world, and decide how do you want to do that, what that will look like. How do I want to occupy my space in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement? How do I want to occupy that space and commit to it? And knowing, like Brene Brown said, she says, there's no brave act without vulnerability. And you have to be ready to rumble with that vulnerability, right? And so it's having those difficult conversations, showing up, speaking up, even if it's uncomfortable. And so I think the first step is knowing I can occupy my space, and deciding how I'm going to do that and commit to that, because it won't look like everybody else. But I need to decide how I want to occupy my space in the midst of this.
I think that is a powerful way for us to end today. I appreciate each of you for being a part of this. Occupying our space, making sure that we are advocating for ourselves, making sure that we are doing everything that we have the ability to do, whether that's voting, whether that's working at the polls, whether that's getting out and making some phone calls, whether that's, checking on a neighbor. Whatever we can do, if we can occupy our space, not worrying about what everybody else is doing, but our spiritual wellness, our physical, mental, emotional wellness, making sure that we seek the help that we need, we surround ourselves with the people that we need to surround them with. I wore this shirt on purpose because empowered women empower women. And I think it's very important that as we begin to look forward and progress out of this pandemic, that we look at how do we bring the village back together. We may not be able to come together physically, but if we can bring those resources in the village together, that's what we have to do. So we thank you again. We appreciate each of you for taking the time being with us today. I don't know if Mary Dean is going to come back on but we're right at our time.